Yes, that is right. Welcome, everybody, on into the Saturday Night Network for week number 4 of our countdown of the greatest cast members in Saturday Night Live history. My name is John Schneider from the SNN. Very excited to be back with you again on this Monday night to put some more names on the list of the greatest cast members of all time, as voted by you, the fans. And this series has been really fun so far. We have revealed 12 names on the list, and I am so pumped for the names we're going to get to talk about tonight. And the best part of all of this is getting all of your feedback. So each and every week, I have truly enjoyed getting to see all the comments in the chat afterwards on the YouTube videos and on our social platforms as we post and reveal these towards the end of the week. We'll give you a few days to listen first so you don't get spoiled. But joining us tonight, we got 2 really fun guests. So first up, let me bring in my man, big Atlanta Braves fan. It is Andrew Haynes. Haynes, how are you?
I'm doing awesome. Not going to give you a hard time about the Braves Cubs series last week. Honestly, I feel bad. But listen, the Braves had the best season in baseball. Postseason starts this week. Looking forward to an exciting postseason, hopefully. I just got back from a week at the beach. We're getting ready to start the fall. I am invigorated.
You spent the whole week at the beach.
I spent the week in Emerald Isle, North Carolina. It was wonderful. And, the fall is my favorite season. I'm ready to just to get into it. Okay, I was getting a lot of feedback. I don't know if anybody was hearing that. I was getting a lot of echo.
Yeah, it's okay. That was just passing through Ian. So Ian, just when we're talking, if you could just mute yourself just so that we don't get the extra feedback through there, that would be great. And then you could always unmute yourself at the bottom. That would be great. So go ahead, Haynes.
Yeah. But yeah, just saying, just so excited. Fall is my favorite season. I'm just so excited. I'm excited for the late night shows coming back tonight. I'm going to stay up and watch them. So just excited to talk SNL and everything.
For sure. All very exciting things you said, except for that Cub stuff. So I appreciate it, Haynes. Glad to get to talk to you. And joining us on the show tonight is one of our great patrons, but he's not just a patron. He is an amazing podcaster about Saturday Night Live and all things comedy. It is the man from Ian Talks Comedy. That would be Ian from English. Ian, how are you?
As a Mets fan, I really shouldn't even be talking to Haynes, but I'm doing great.
Glad to get you on the show tonight, Ian. So can't wait to get your thoughts as we keep going. All right. So let me just, Ian, do you have headphones with you, by the way, just to take care of that echo? If you do, and you don't mind plugging those in, just making sure, because otherwise it'll avoid the feedback that we're getting on the YouTube video. I just want to make sure all of our live listeners can enjoy the show. So appreciate that. All right, let's do a quick update and check in on where we're at in week number 4 of this countdown. So since we were here last Monday night, we talked about there being a tentative agreement with the WGA and the AMPTP. Since we have been on with you last, we have an agreement. So it seems like everything is going through. There's been votes that seem to pass, and as far as I understand, things are pretty good over there with the writers. Today, SAG. So it seems like that is starting to be talked through. There's no deal yet, but that seems to be a lot of progress. There's some conflicting reports about how SNL can come back or not during these SAG discussions. Very well might, we'll see what happens. But for now, as Haynes mentioned, we got some late night shows coming back, and it is certainly possible that Saturday Night Live could return as soon as next weekend. And if it does, we're going to pivot here on the podcast and get very excited to preview season 49 as soon as we get some of that information and that we're allowed to talk about it. We will have our preseason roundtable. We'll hopefully have a draft for you guys about the cast going into the season. And then we'll, of course, be back for the regular schedule. If that's the case, next week, we'll be back on Thursday night for our countdown instead of Monday night. But if there's no SNL on the 14th, we'll be back each and every Monday night until SNL comes back. So that's the update on the schedule for now. Very excited to see what happens. I will tell you that for those wondering, we have a rerun of Steve and Marty's episode coming up on NBC this weekend at 11:30. All right. For now, we're going to get to the 4 new cast members that we will be revealing to you tonight. But first, as always, let's go over the cast members that we've talked about in the last few weeks to give you a refresher of who was on the list already. And I want to get Haynes and Ian's opinion on the list so far. Do they feel like the listeners have done a good job or not? So I'll put that up on screen right now. Starting with you, Haynes, what do you think of 39 through 50 I will read them out and then I'll get your opinion. So from the bottom, Kevin Nealon, then Joe Piscopo, David Spade, Mikey Day, Tracy Morgan, Chevy Chase, Jimmy Fallon, Bowen Yang, Martin Short, Sherry O'Terry, Ego Wodum, and Taron Killam. Haynes, over to you.
So, obviously SNL has just pumped out so much talent over the years. I mean, the list obviously goes well past 50 as far as just amazing, incredible talent that has been on the show. So, that said, I think, listen, I feel okay about a lot of this stuff. What I'm going to have a tough time with is as we get more of these numbers popping up. So right now we've only got 12 names up there. Okay. So, we assume, that like, Anthony Michael Hall is not gonna, jump ahead here, right?
Spoiler alert.
So we know that's not the case, right? But I wonder, with only 12 names on the board, I do think there's some folks kind of on the fence who, and you never know with internet voting. I feel like sometimes people vote on just like bigger brand names and that kind of stuff. Are we going to see someone like, Billy Crystal, who was very good, only on the show for a short period of time, but are we going to see someone like a name like that pop ahead of someone who had a much longer tenure on the show, but isn't as much of a brand name to folks? That's once we have more, like with only 12 names, I can't really predict, with those people on the fence, like who's going to be jumping ahead. Those are the ones that I would have a problem with. If we start jumping ahead of Tracy Morgan, if Billy Crystal goes ahead of Tracy Morgan, I don't think that's right. And I could see that's a type of name that could pop up in there. So, but Martin Short, obviously extremely brief tenure, but he was just so explosive and I think influential. I always say that I think Sherry O'Terry was like, the female coming of Martin Short, or like it just seems she was so influenced by him, her spastic nature, and I love them both so much. To me, I'm okay with this list. Chevy Chase, I think, has a lot of influence on the show, and maybe he's a little bit far down. I do have a tendency to, let me put it this way. I don't think it's unfair to ascribe a little bit of extra credit to folks who were there during the early years and really were at the, the roots of this influence tree that's going to spread out. So yeah, maybe Chevy Chase should be above Ego, but maybe not. She's amazing.
Yeah. And that's the big argument, right? About, how much do you value 1 year of work, even if it was at the beginning? And that was a big part of week number 2 of this discussion. I spoke to our friend Bill Kenny. He felt similarly to you, where he was like, Chevy might be kind of low here. So I think he's a big name on this list so far that people are questioning. I saw a lot of discussion last week about Taron Killam and if he's, does he deserve to make the list? I felt like he was at the top of my list so far. So it's a lot of interesting, there's a lot of interesting people so far to figure out and parse through. And Haynes, I'm just going to jump over to Ian because I want to get his thoughts too on this list and how he feels about the first 12 names revealed so far. So Ian, what do you think of the list right now? Here, Ian, let me just unmute you so just make sure all the listeners can hear you.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah, I think it's a pretty good list. I voted for at least 10 out of these 12 people. But, we don't put an order. We don't describe an order when we vote. So the number is kind of, yeah, I agree. Chevy Chase should be higher. Definitely over the another Weekend Update anchor he's one below.
Yeah, which would be, we have Kevin Nealon on that list and he's behind Jimmy Fallon. So interesting.
And I love Martin Short. I love what he did on the show. Tracy Morgan's great. Spade.
Okay.
I like the list.
All right. I like it too. I mean, I like I said, you can quibble with some of the order of it, but I do feel like we have some really solid 12 names on here. Marty was the one who I wasn't exactly sure, but a lot of people hit me up after last week and were like, slander. So anyways, either way, excited to reveal the next 4 names on the list. So Haynes, Ian, are you guys ready to go? Are you excited?
Yes.
Let's do it. Okay. Next up on the list at number 38 is a cast member I absolutely loved when I saw them on the show. They had a very interesting career that I'm excited to talk about, one with a brief stopover in the middle. But here we are going to talk through a great cast member that a lot of our fans love, and that would be Chris Parnell, coming in at number 38 on the list. On the show for 8 seasons, he was actually let go partway through his tenure on the show, was brought back, stayed on through 2006, and just in my opinion, a workhorse on the show. Did a lot of voiceover work, was in a lot of sketches, had some interesting characters during his time on the show. He comes on at the same time as Jimmy and Horatio, and they're a duo, and it's interesting to see how Parnell fits into everything. But to me, he stabilizes so many sketches, and I do want to shout out one of our great podcasting friends who released a podcast very similar to this one last week, which would be the SNL Hall of Fame podcast with Thomas Senna, and Dave Buckman was their guest talking about Parnell. And I just enjoyed so much getting to hear them break down Parnell's time on the show. I think he is such a great cast member. So Haynes, what do you think about Chris Parnell as a cast member, number 38 on the list?
I love to see him. Love to see him on the list. And I mean, I think you nailed it when you described him as a workhorse. I think actually, that's part of what I think his legacy will be underplayed in the long run, because I don't think of him as someone who had a ton of standout recurring characters. I don't think of him as having been in a lead role in like a super, viral, which that wasn't a term at the time, but you know what I mean by that. Just a super popular, game-changing sketch that everyone watched, except for Lazy Sunday. I'll say Lazy Sunday was super impactful, of course. But I think I think Chris Parnell is amazing. And I think he's amazing in every role. Even though, yes, he very often is, a dad, a doctor, a lawyer, an investment banker kind of guy. He's someone who's like serious and well-spoken a lot of times. So he can get a little bit typecast with that type of role, but he made me laugh super, super hard every time. And my worry is that because he doesn't have some huge claim to fame, he won't be spoken about enough in the future. I think right now we're lucky that he's still kind of in the zeitgeist, because after he got us SNL, he's been a mainstay in our culture in so many ways. Obviously, pretty much everyone who's an SNL fan is a 30 Rock fan. Dr. Leo Spaceman is a great long-term enduring character for him that I absolutely loved. He's on Archer and he's been in a ton of other stuff. So you're used to hearing that voice. I hear him in commercials and stuff sometimes. So I think that, he's still talked about a little bit off the show. I think in the future, since we have to anticipate that this stuff will stop, of course, as he gets a little bit older, or recede at least. My fear is that the casual fans of SNL, people who don't study it the way we do, or who didn't spend time, watching SNL during those Chris Parnell years, my fear is that his legacy will be undersold. People won't talk about him enough. I think he's awesome, and I'm just thrilled to see him on the list.
Yeah, I think one of the most underrated cast members in the history of the show by far. Ian, would love to know, how do you feel about Chris Parnell as a cast member?
Big fan of Chris Parnell. What you said before about him playing a dad or an authority figure, but it's always with a little bit of craziness underneath. And he could always do that twist and that turn. and you'll get a Bloater Brothers or the Hollywood Gynecologist or the DeMarco Brothers, where it's silly, but he still has that same face that belies the character that he's playing.
100%. I mean, look, I'll go over my criteria for what I look for in a cast member. I've been discussing this every single week, and then I'm going to ask the two of you what you look for when you're judging if this cast member is great or not. So for me, it's really three things. It's, were you made to be on SNL? Do you have the stats to back it up? And what is your legacy at the show? And I think he was made for sketch comedy. I mean, this guy is just, he's just, like I said, an absolute workhorse. You could put him in any role. And I think he's so important for sketches. He's never going to be the guy that is the most eccentric. I guess maybe every now and then, but he's really the guy that stabilizes a sketch. When you have a bunch of crazies, he's the one that could be just a little crazy, just a little weird, and gives you the biggest laugh in the entire sketch. And I love that. Plus, he's just so talented. I mean, his ability to rap, call Parnell and see how he's doing. I mean, that, I just think of Parnell, Lazy Sunday, his raps is on Weekend Update. Like, they were just so good, and just a really talented guy. And then numbers certainly back it up. I mean, he has some great stats. He has a 4.52 sketch per episode average. We talk about this every single week. 12th all time in the history of SNL among cast members with 30 or more episodes. In 146 episodes of the show, only shut out once. He led all cast members in sketches in season 26. In season 24, his first season, he was third. Season 25, he was tied for first with Will Ferrell. Season 26, like I said, first. Season 28, 3. Season 29, 3. Season 35, season 31, 2. He was always near the top. I really feel like, you talk about some of the greatest cast members of all time as a glue of the show. He was a glue for many seasons, and that is why I am very high on him. The only thing I could take away is I don't know if he has the legacy. I mean, clearly clearly our fans voted for him to be up there. But is Parnell remembered as well as he should be? So that is my big question, and why I think maybe he dropped down to 38 on the list. Haynes, what are your criteria when you're evaluating, and how does Parnell fit into them?
Well, yeah, I don't think I put as much value on the numbers as you do. I think a person can have a brief, glinting, moment on the show. But if they have that it factor, that star performer it factor, that magnetism that attracts us to them every time, which I do think Chris Parnell had that. And of course he does have some stats to back it up. That's what I look for, is that it factor first and foremost. It's intangible. It's hard to articulate, but some people have it, and Chris Parnell did. I do love the sketches per episode stat. I mean, when you look at 146 episodes and 4.52 sketches per episodes, I mean, that to me, that those are some good deep numbers. A lot of people look at total episodes, but those sketches per episode, I think, super important too. This shows you, how important he was to supporting the show for so many years, albeit being the only person fired twice for budget reasons.
Yeah, which is a really weird footnote in his legacy on the show. But like you said, 4.52 sketches per episode. That's 4.5 sketches. Every single night you were watching Saturday Night Live while Chris Parnell was a member of the cast, you were seeing him that night. He was out there. So Ian, for you, what are your criteria when you're evaluating these cast members, and does Parnell match those criteria of yours?
That's an interesting question. One thing about the viral moment, though, as somebody who had Kazaa and Napster in 1998, 1999, 2000, the Britney Spears rap was downloaded constantly. So he did have, I guess, I don't even know what you would call that back then. But I would say that was he built in the lab to be on Saturday Night Live? Is he a sketch person? Can they do everything? Can they blend into the background of a sketch? Can they do a game show host? Can he do an impression? Do they have characters of their own? And Chris Parnell has all of those. And the same thing with the numbers, but he's got the numbers. So it's like some cast members, the numbers aren't as important, but when you have them, it just shows you how important the writers thought he was and the other cast members.
Yeah, I think one of the things that maybe knocks him down the list a little bit is the fact that he hasn't come back and hosted the show. He has like a few guest appearances where I think he's hosted some debates in different impressions. But really, since his time at the show, I guess going back almost 15 years, he really, hasn't been seen too much on the show. And I think for modern day viewers, they may not remember the name Chris Parnell as much because a lot of cast members with stats like his would have hosted the show at one point or would have come back. And to me, I just think his career at the show is so weird. Like, he's clearly so successful, yet he's fired twice. He's clearly so remembered among the super fans, yet he doesn't necessarily get the recognition in the main fan community. Like I said, so underrated to me. To finish the discussion on Chris Parnell tonight, I want to go to both you, Haynes, and you, Ian, and just ask if there are any other moments for you that you do remember of Chris Parnell that you would recommend people go check out as memories of him. Haynes, going with you.
I'm showing well, obviously I mentioned Lazy Sunday. I think probably a lot of people are familiar with that. So not exactly a deep cut, but this is, and when I, mentioned something about investment banking earlier, I was referring to this old Dylan Edwards investment commercial parody that they did that was pretty funny, but I'm really showing my age here. For some reason, and maybe I was just paying attention to, well, I wouldn't have been paying attention more to politics then than I am now. But for some reason, his Joe Lieberman always comes to mind. I always think of Chris Parnell's Joe Lieberman for some reason. So you want to see some funny old political sketches, go Google Chris Parnell and Joe Lieberman. And I think you'll have fun with that.
That is a deep cut, but that is very, very funny. Ian, what about you? Any moments of Chris Parnell's either characters or impressions that you want to bring up?
This is funny because I was just looking before doing some research, and I'm like, he looks like Joe Lieberman. He must have played him. And yeah, then I looked up the sketch, and it's really funny. The Joe Lieberman voice that he did that. He had it perfect. And, his Jim Lair is, for the debates, is also, it's on a deep cut because everybody's seen the strategery sketch, but he's leading that sketch.
Yeah, that is very true. I do think about the brief period in time where he got George W. Bush as a role of his post Will Ferrell, which was like a little bit of weird. They tried it with Daryl, they tried it with him, they try it with Forte, and he's like one of those guys that they try with. Never fully clicked. He does do a ton of impressions during his time on the show, 49 of them, in fact, as we see on the, if you're watching the YouTube video, you see on the graphic here. But he did a really good Tom Brokaw. I remember that as well. Wolf Blitzer, like a lot of really good political news guys that I will always remember him for. And I think some characters, were always really interesting. The DeMarco brothers that he did with Chris Kattan. He did the Wayne Bloater with Jimmy Fallon. So he had some like fun moments that he had on the show. And it is interesting to think, how he would have fit into that 2006, 2007 cast once we really get Bill Hader and Andy Samberg and Jason Sudeikis and Kristen Wiig start to, come on the show and establish themselves. He crossovers with a lot of them for 1 year, and then he's let go. And I sort of wonder if he could have really continued to fit in, because we saw how well he did with Andy Samberg during that Lazy Sunday for a year. So I think there was more to gain out of Parnell. I wouldn't have minded if he had stuck around for season 32 and 33 and stuff like that. But either way, I love this guy. I'm so happy I got to talk about him, and great job to the fans for putting him on the list here at number 38. Okay, Haynes, Ian, we got some heavy hitters tonight. Like I said, you ready to get to number 37 to talk about this next person?
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's do it. So this next guy is coming on, and a lot of people have talked about that this guy could have saved the show at a certain point. So, I mean, a lot of people, think of different names when that term comes up. But I think he was so integral to the history of the show. If you pluck him out of SNL history, the show is very, very different. He was on for 5 years, and he made a mark on the show. And that would be, at 37, John Lovitz, who was on the show starting from season 11 all the way through season 15, 5 years on the show. Season 11, really his year on the show, led that season in sketch appearances. As everybody famously knows, he was saved by that fire from with Lorne Michaels at the end of that season, brought on and joins this next group of mega performers who come onto the show in season 12 and really build that next great era of the show. And, you know, we haven't yet, and we'll potentially talk about players like Phil Hartman and Dana Carvey. We already discussed Kevin Nealon, but just so many greats. And you can't forget about John Lovitz's contributions to the show during that time. And great characters, great impressions. I'm going to let the guys talk about those in just a second. But for me, 37, John Lovitz, definitely well-deserved to be on the list. So, Haynes, what are your thoughts on John Lovitz and his role on the list? RIP.
Oh my God. I was horrified to hear of his passing. But but other than that, yeah, I mean, listen, made a mark is a way to put it. He really did. I mean, not just on the show, but like on me and on culture. I mean, you know, we know that obviously SNL influences, you know, the comedic aesthetic at any given time, but sometimes more than others. And he was just such a unique actor, such interesting delivery. Yes. Acting. And I mean, it like he really tinged, you know, the 90s for me. Like I made a lot of jokes in a John Lovitz vein. You know, he was an influence on me as like, you know, a 10-year-old, you know, and the kind of jokes I was trying to make in fourth grade. I just think, you know, like we said, well, or yeah, like I was saying with Chris Parnell, I do wonder, you know, so this is interesting that now that we're talking about, I'm comparing him to Chris Parnell because we have had some time for John Lovitz to be not in the zeitgeist. And I do think he's under talked about, but I think anyone who's paid attention to SNL history knows that like, this was an extremely influential, you know, player, cast member. Everybody brings something different to the table, but he's just so incredibly unique. I have no idea what he is like at his current state, but I'm gonna go see him do stand-up in November. So I'll let you know. I'll tell you all about it. I have no idea. As far as I know, he could get up there and like, you know, be like a crazy MAGA person. I have no idea where he's at in his life right now. but I don't expect that. But I don't expect it.
Yeah.
When I think of John Lovitz, you know, one thing that is really interesting to me is there seems to be a theme with the characters that he portrays, right? So, you know, we've got Tommy Flanagan, you know, the president of Liars Anonymous. You know, he's so well known for the Master Thespian. He, you know, that One More Mission sketch with Phil Hartman, you know, where he's trying to, you know, bring this actor, you know, on his final mission. It seems to me that so many of the characters he portrays or the sketches that he's in center on this theme of creating a perception different than reality, either about lying or acting or being something other than yourself. It's almost like that was like a central theme to the work that he had on the show, which I thought was really interesting. And maybe he's just living out, you know, his experience as an actor and someone who bullshits on a certain level for a living. You know, I know that Stephen Colbert always thinks of himself that way. And in fact, you know, Stephen Colbert is famously from South Carolina. Always, for people who don't know, North Carolina and South Carolina, we don't truly hate each other, but we beef. We pretend like we hate each other, and like the other, you know, people are kind of a joke. The motto of North Carolina is to be rather than to seem. And Stephen Colbert, I don't know if it's just a shot at North Carolina. I think it's part of his defining South Carolina identity. but also just he thinks of himself. He tells everyone that his personal motto is to seem rather than to be, right? And I guess that's the essence of someone who lives their life in an act. But John Lovitz seems to, and I have no idea what he's like, in his real life, but I just find it really fascinating that when you watch his history with SNL, he really seems to have this theme of focusing on liars and acting and deception and altering perception. And I know that's kind of a meta thing to talk about, and we can definitely get into just the ha-has of the sketches. But to me, when I was reviewing some of this stuff, that's not a thread that I'd put together just as someone growing up watching John Lovitz. I just thought he had a funny voice, and that's why I was doing it on the bus, when I was 11 years old or something. But to me, that was the fascinating thing that I took away from doing a bunch of John Lovitz rewatch this week.
He was a real George Santos of his time. I mean, just yeah. Truly incredible words, Haynes. Thanks for saying all that. I mean, yeah, like I said, I just think that there will never be a John Lovitz again. Like, there was not one before him, and there'll never be one after him. He's so unique in his ability to perform, and it's just he is an archetype unto himself, and that's why I think it's a fascinating watch to get to see him on the show. Ian, love to get your thoughts on John Lovitz as a cast member.
John Lovitz is one of my favorite cast members of all time. I started watching Saturday Night Live in 1985. I was 8. Is when Pee Wee Herman hosted. That was his third episode. He did The Liar for the second time. And he was my favorite guy then. I switched to Dana when he left, but I loved Lovitz, which sounds weird. But I loved all his characters. You talked about the devil and the liar and acting, but also the Girl Watchers, which is a hysterical sketch where he and Tom Hanks are just trying to pick up women, and they have no clue. They think they have a shot, but they don't. It's like, oh yes, that it's just a great character. Evelyn Quince. I don't think he did it maybe 2 or 3 times, but he was dressed as a fop, and he liked to watch the beginning of not like an adult movie, and then when it gets to the sex, then he's disinterested. And it was just a funny character. And I think Tom Hanks was in one on the Aerosmith episode, and Michael Dukakis was great in '88. I read that when he got hired for Saturday Night Live, Al Franken told him, "You're everything we didn't want, all wrapped up in one." Because they want the Chevy Chase, good looking Phil Hartman, American, classic American looking guy, and he's not, but he's hysterical. And also his Harvey Firestein impression was a really big fan of that one. And the thing I think that they're helping out is his still continuing association with The Simpsons. So that almost every year or every other year he makes a guest appearance on The Simpsons. The Critic in the 90s was a really good show. And A League of Their Own is on every day. So,
I love what you said, Ian, where you said that that story about Al Franken, because everything on paper would tell you that John Lovitz should be like one of the most unlikable people. He's so smarmy in the way he performs, but I can't tell you he is on the top of my list of most likable cast members ever. I just think he's just he's so lovable. He's like the guy that you want to just have fun with. You want to always rib and stuff like that. And that's why at SNL 40, they're going to make the joke that he's dead, because there's no other cast member you could do that with where he's going to play into it and steer into it every time, because his whole life, from everything I've seen, from every cast member that's ever talked about him, is just that he's just always making people laugh. He's always doing something funny. And I think that's why he was so perfect. He came on SNL at a time where SNL was struggling to find its identity, and he managed to steer it in the right direction a little bit. And then once he had some players around him who were, like I said, just forces on the show, I think he was just perfect. I think from a legacy perspective, my only wish is that he stayed on the show longer. I mean, I think he's talked about how he, at the end of those 5 years, he wanted to go off and do some movies, and then he wasn't allowed to stay on the show as a cast member. And like, can you imagine if John Lovitz was given the privilege that the current cast members are given, where they can go off and do whatever they want pretty much and stay on the show? John Lovitz could have been on the show another 3 seasons at least as a cast member, and we would have gotten so much from him. So I can't fault him for him only being on the show for 5 years, because it's been written about and he's talked about many times how he wanted to stay on the show. So like I said, built in a lab, 100%. There's like almost no cast member that I think was better suited for the show than John Lovitz. From a stats perspective, he's right up there. Just like we talked about with Parnell, he has a 4.38 SPE. That's just a little bit further down. 17th all time among cast members with 30 or more episodes. Was in 91 episodes. Never shut out of the show. So every single episode John Lovitz was in as a cast member, you saw him a little over 4 times an episode. In season 11. Dominated. Season 12, he went down to 4th. Season 13, 3rd. Season 14, 3rd. And season 15, 2nd. So always near the top of sketch appearances, always making a big contribution to the show. I think that this is low for John Lovitz, honestly. I think 37 is one of the lower numbers I would have expected him. Rolling Stone, back in 10 years ago, we talked a little bit the last few weeks about their writings. They had him at 19. And I think that they did a good job with that. They said that he knew what he was good at and he consistently steered into that direction. I forgot to bring up Parnell's number on Rolling Stone, which was actually 35. We had him at 38. So far, so good from Rolling Stone tonight. I'm actually appreciating where they had these cast members. I think John Lovitz is low on the list right now. I think that time has probably done him wrong as far as people voting for him. To me, he's closer to the top 25 than he is at 37. So I think that he is well-deserved to be on this list. And certainly I love the praise that everyone in the chat is giving him as well. Haynes, any other moments for you that you want to talk about when it comes to John Lovitz or anything else from his legacy?
Well, obviously, Mephistopheles, is well-loved. Something that I haven't seen in a really long time. I didn't watch it this week, but just crossing my mind. I'm assuming that like Tonto would be problematic these days.
I think so,
but I haven't rewatched it, so haven't done a full analysis. But I certainly remember that. I just remember that imagery of him. But his whole quirkiness. I mean, listen, you described his on-stage persona as smarmy. I mean, that's it. And he's just so hilarious and lovable. Yeah, I'm just a huge fan. And like you said, probably a little low on the list, especially considering I just think he had a real underlying influence on comedy beyond SNL at that time.
Yeah, if you want a really good example of something that really shouldn't work on the show and probably doesn't work if any other cast member is doing this character, look up Annoying Man. That is his character he does on Weekend Update. And it is so stupid and so funny, but only John Lovitz could get away with it. And that is why I think his legacy is so strong at the show, because he is so unique. Ian, anything else on John Lovitz that you want to bring up?
I would do it, I guess, the opposite of a deep cut and then a deep cut. The Night Hanukkah Harry Saved Christmas is a classic sketch. And they used to show it every year in the Christmas special. And then they tried to do an Easter one, but that wasn't that good. But one sketch I really love with him, and it's a really good acting sketch. It's called The Last Man on Earth. And it was when Gina Davis hosted in 1989. And basically, nuclear explosion. He's the last man alive, and he's going up to a woman who said she wouldn't date him if he was the last man alive. But now he is, and she still won't go out with him. It's a low key sketch, but he plays it great.
That's classic Lovitz and so perfect for his role on the show. So there you go, fans. You got to let us know, was this too low for John Lovitz at number 37? But either way, he's on the list right now, and we will keep talking about it as we go through. Okay, guys, 2 down, 2 to go tonight. Very excited for what's going to come up next. This is a cast member that I think will be very interesting to discuss because has enough time passed to properly evaluate their legacy on the show. That is my major thesis question going into this one as we reveal number 36 on the list. But here we go. My man, number 36, Beck Bennett comes in over here, who just recently left the show a few years ago in 2021. He was on for 8 seasons from 2013 to 2021, 164 episodes. There for a long time at the show. And I think I caught to cover him. So did you, Haynes, in season 46. It was really fun to have him there. I think the show's missed him a little bit. Out of all the cast members that have left over the last few years, I think there's a little bit of a Beck Bennett hole in the cast where he just did some things that were really, really impressive during his time on the show. 739 sketches, did some amazing voiceovers. He was good in pre-tapes. He was good in live sketches. He's not in the character era of the show, but he certainly comes into SNL with that baby boss character, as we get to see early on his relationship with Kyle Mooney, their bromance and fun stuff that they did together on the show with Dave McCary. All that stuff is really fun to go back and look on, especially in the post Lonely Island world. And yeah, I just think he's a really incredible cast member. He led the cast in sketch appearances to season 42, 45, and 46. He had a major influence during this time on the show. I think a big question mark, like I said, has enough time passed to be able to properly evaluate his legacy at the show? And do you like his era of the show? Season 42, when we were doing our seasons draft, very well regarded. He had some really good, he was part of some really good seasons. But, you know, he was also there during the Trump era. He was also there during the COVID seasons. You know, does it matter if he continued to dominate during those seasons, if the seasons will not be necessarily remembered as amazing seasons? I think these are all question marks as we talk about Beck Bennett's legacy on the show. But here he is at number 36. Ian, I'm going to start with you this time. I want to know what your thoughts are on Beck Bennett as a cast member.
I think Beck Bennett is in that same mold, a little different of Taron Killam, of who we talked about earlier, Chris Parnell. He is a solid workhorse as well. Can play Mike Pence, or can play the person who's hosting the sketch. It could be a game show host. He could be the wacky contestant. He can do it all. He's a great utility guy, and he can star in sketches as well.
For sure. Haynes, what do you think about Beck Bennett as a cast member? It's been a few years since we got to talk about your thoughts on him.
Okay, so yes, hasn't been gone long. So of course, as we get a little further down the line, I think, legacy does start to take a little bit more shape because, things that are maybe a little bit more average as far as their performance start to drift from the memory. And of course, you only get left with these kind of jewels that you recall, the further we get down the line. But I don't think, we need to be particularly far removed to say that, he was a really important cast member to the show, for the bulk of the time that he was there. Listen, J.A.J. can play a dad. He'll never be a Beck Bennett dad. Beck is the ultimate dad, this is a special dad that we lost. But I do think, and listen, I had fun with a lot of his impressions. Obviously Putin, Mike Pence, when you mentioned Chris Parnell as Wolf Blitzer earlier, and I think I got to give the Wolf Blitzer to Beck Bennett here. And so those impressions, I think, will define a lot of his legacy. And, I loved them all, slightly grossed out by the usually greased up Putin chest. But enjoy the impressions, and the sketches. I do think his legacy will be highly tied to, if not, it will stand on its own in some way. For example, I think those impressions stand on their own. But to me, I don't think it's deny that his legacy has to be tied to that of Kyle Mooney. I mean, him and Kyle were just partners in so many ways. I love so many of the sketches that they did together, so many of the recurring sketches. Brothers, the house that was basically like making fun of Big Brother or something that they did so many times. Uh,
I think Real World. Real World. That was it.
Real World. Whatever. Yeah. Same thing. They're all the same to me. I can't. Can you tell the difference between Real World and Big Brother? No, it's way more Big Brother than Real World. I think. Whatever. Anyway. They just did. I mean, it felt like the list of sketches that they did together is endless. It feels like he did 80% of his sketches with Kyle Mooney. That doesn't feel like it would be an exaggeration. I don't know what the numbers are. But he will stand on his own for those, certain types of impressions. I also think, I mean, he's really good at being surprised and shocked and not realizing how he's screwed something up. I think that, obviously December to Remember is a commercial parody that gets a lot of love. I think that's, one that people will talk about for a long time. But he's also got, he's got great characters too. On Weekend Update, Jules, who sees things just a little bit differently. I think we all know someone like that. It was a relatable character, especially if you have friends who work in academia. They seem to know a lot of people like that. Listen, I think Beck's legacy will stand on his own in a certain way, but I don't think we can separate it from Kyle, because they were partners in crime the whole time. And so I don't mean to diminish him in any way by saying that he's tied together. I don't think you'd be diminishing, Kate McKinnon to say that her legacy is tied to 80 Bryant's in a way. They just did so much together. So don't take it that way. And honestly, if
well, I have a theory though. Can I jump in
Sure.
here, Haynes? Just say, so I think that over time, we're going to look back at Beck Bennett's time with the show as being a very unique place in history in terms of this, which is that most eras of the show, we talk about how the women were overshadowed by the men at the show. And because of that, their legacies were not properly recognized. I think Beck's legacy was overshadowed by the women at the show for the first time in SNL's history, where the women absolutely took over and dominated the show. And for good reason. These are some all-time greats. But I think that in a women-driven show, Beck was the leader, or the most the man that appeared the most and was the most influential on given episodes during that era. That I do think he was overshadowed in a way by the Kates and 80s and Cecilys.
I will buy that horse. I hadn't thought about that, but at least, I hadn't thought about it recently, but going back to when we were covering this time, I mean, yeah, of course we talked about the female dominance on the show, just the insane content that they were putting out and just dominating, so many awesome sketches. And yeah, so I do think that probably, overshadowed him a little bit. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Hadn't thought about it, but totally agree.
And that's what I'm looking forward to in season 49. And one of those things that we'll talk about as we start to preview the new season is that I do think that the gender balance has evened out a lot after we've lost some of this previous era, that everyone's on like an equal playing field in a way. Which is fine. I mean, and again, we waited a long time for women to dominate the show, so nothing wrong with that. But the point here is that I do believe that the focus had moved off that, and had Beck, appeared in previous eras of the show, he may be remembered as someone who dominated one of those previous eras where men were dominating. So it's just an interesting thought experiment to think about there. Yeah, I think he was a really solid cast member. 4.51 sketches per episode, 14th all time. I mean, like we said, 4.5 sketches. I mean, we're all talking about analytics that are around the same. He's definitely up there. He was really, really involved in the show. Season 39, his first season, he was 8th in sketch appearances. Season 40, he was 6th. And then he took a big jump starting in 41, where he went from 3 to 1 to 2 to 2 to 1 to 1 through those last 6 seasons as a cast member. So those last 6 seasons, he was always in the top 3 in sketch appearances, very much involved in the show. So legacy, very hard to determine, only a couple years out, but I do wonder over time if he's going to rise or go low. I think he's going to rise. I think people will miss Beck Bennett and think fondly of his time at the show. Ian, for you, any other thoughts on Beck and some of his characters or moments on the show?
I think that Beck Bennett is one of those guys who could have been with any cast. It could have been in the original cast. It could have been in the 80s and the 90s. He's one of those guys, one of those performers who is just a chameleon, and he can fit in and do what you need him to do.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I think I could have seen him anywhere, and I think that the other interesting aspect is like to think about when it comes to Beck's legacy is we're always going to remember season 39. He comes on with like a ton of new cast members, and him and Kyle are the ones to survive. But I do think that his legacy ended up like rising a little bit above Kyle's at the end of the day, even if Kyle stayed one more season. And I think he ends up like winning out of a pool of a bunch of new candidates that joined the show. So it's just an interesting thought experiment to discuss Beck. And like I said, I think the show misses him. And I think that if he ever does pop up for a cameo appearance, I think the fandom's going to go nuts. I think everyone's going to really, really give him his due if he ever shows up in a sketch again. I think like I could just see Twitter or X just blowing up. Oh my God, Beck Bennett's back at the show, like that type of thing. And I can't wait for that moment. That'd be really, really fun to get to talk about. Haynes, any final thoughts on Beck?
I'll just say this. We mentioned a lot of his big impressions and roles, and but I talked about him, the characters that he plays sometimes being not realizing they're being idiots or like trying to lie their way out of situations. I feel like that's like just a very common vibe with the characters they wrote him into. So just one sketch that if people out there haven't seen, Undercover Office Potty, Undercover Office Potty is just a great sketch. I won't give it away, but I can smell it from here. It's fantastic. Go look up Undercover Office Potty if you haven't seen that for some great Beck Bennett work.
So funny. And of course, I mean, oh man, I'm all out of cash. I'll always remember as well. So there's some good ones from Beck. Okay. 3 down, 1 to go tonight. And I'm very excited to talk about this next cast member who comes in at 35 before we close the book on tonight's reveal. And this is a cast member who I think's legacy at the show is as big as it gets. She was very, very important to the history of the show, broke a lot of barriers, and I think is remembered extremely fondly, was on the show for 5 years. In fact, the first 5 years. And that would be the great Jane Curtin, who comes in here at 35 on the list. Very well known for being the first woman anchor of Weekend Update, becoming that anchor after Chevy Chase. Plays a lot of really interesting roles in those first 5 years. Like just an incredible force, in my opinion. And I think that over time, her legacy has improved as the DVDs came out, people went to go watch back. I think people realized and recognized the value of Jane Curtin there, playing alongside somebody like a Gilda, who is so eccentric, so out there, so doing those characters. And she's the one who grounds so much stuff in the show. Also being, largely a part of the Coneheads and other things like that. I really feel like Jane Curtin's legacy of the show is so, so strong. And one of the best moments of my SNL watching career was getting to see her at the Weekend Update desk during SNL 40 with Tina Fey and Amy Poehler. Just truly an incredible, incredible moment. So I'm very proud that I get to talk about Jane Curtin here at number 35, one of my favorite cast members of all time. Ian, what are your memories of Jane Curtin and your thoughts on her legacy of the show?
Jane's great. And I mean, you were talking about her, playing straight roles to Gilda, but if you watch her, she's always doing things in the back. She's always, she takes even a little role and she just makes it her own, and she makes it special with a head tilt or just the way she had some of the best line reads in the first 5 years on Weekend Update. when she played Joan Crawford in the Mommy Dearest Christmas sketch, and she played the mom, but Dan Aykroyd usually always played the dad. So Mrs. Wydette, Enid Loopner, uh, Conehead, Primat Conehead against Dan Aykroyd in two of those, and I love Iris DiFlaminio. I mean, with 5 episodes left, she had a character that repeated 3 times, which I think is amazing, and of course Joan Face going against Dan Aykroyd, and I just remember the line, if just knowing that one of those pinky rings on those greasy fingers of yours has been made from money hurting children, and then finally she, in the last one, she just attacks them in the in those sketches. Those were great. I love Jane Carter. She's just one of my favorite cast members as well.
She's so good. I just think, like, everyone in that original cast has a part to play in what made that, era of the show so fantastic, and what made the original, SNL just so fondly remembered. And like I said, I just think, I think I saw in the chat, John here in the chat says, people think about her as a straight person, but no one played disgust better than Jane. And I love that comment, John, that you just said, because her disgust at the crazy group of characters that would come face to face with her throughout her time at the show was so fantastic, and created this legacy of other update performers and people on the show that would, follow that in future generations of how do you interact with the crazy on the show. She was the best of the best at something like that. So Haynes, what is your opinion on Jane Curtin as a cast member and where she landed on the list here?
I mean, obviously she's, an OG. She is a pioneer. I think much of her legacy, obviously is tied to, well, I think, a lot of the role that she played on the show was kind of being this, tough woman trying to stand up in a man's world. That was a lot of the characters that she played were kind of fitting into that role. And so, it was easy to, I think for a lot of probably, women, in comedy, or who wanted to be in comedy, to look at her as a hero. I know that she obviously is a hero to many of my female comedic heroes. Comedic heroes who are female. I don't separate my comedic heroes into male and female, but
give us a list, Haynes.
Well, one list gets paid a lot less. But
back then,
Jerry Lewis says what?
Yeah. But so I mean, she's a hero of mine, and I love everything that she represents. And that, like, I just, and obviously it's a show, it's a comedy show, we're acting, but I loved her acting as this. It was just such a great, so many great roles, for a woman to be in television in that time. Inspiring and powerful. And obviously, anyone anchoring the Weekend Update desk is hugely important to the history of the show. Except for Horatio Sands, his 8 episodes or whatever, 2 episodes, whatever it was, too. So, I mean, she's hugely important for that role. I think that obviously Coneheads is one of the most iconic sketches of all time. One of the ones that got turned into a film, of course, and one of the more successful films. A lot of SNL sketches have been turned into films that were not particularly successful. Coneheads was kind of a hit, I think. I don't know that I was old enough to really analyze the box office numbers back then, but the feeling was that it was a bit of a hit. And so, yeah, I mean, I've just always thought of her as such a rock star. I guess it's fair to have her here, but like, I feel like if I was just if I was just having a quick conversation and we were just starting to name off influential big people in the history of SNL, I mean, I don't think I would get through 34 people before I mentioned Jane Curtin. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, and that will be the big question as we reveal those next 34 people and talk through it. But I think her arc on the show as a cast member is probably the most fascinating one of the original cast for me, at least, because it's just very interesting to see her in season one of the show. She's sort of there and trying to figure out her place. I do think she's not figured it out yet. And then season 2 of the show, Chevy gets injured. She takes over the update desk temporarily, and then finally will take it over permanently as he leaves. And, goes on air and talks about the complaints that she's getting about not being Chevy Chase, or rips off her shirt. You see her bra on television in the 70s, and it's like, oh my God, a woman on TV doing this stuff. Like, oh my. And she's there to fight the haters and prove her role on the show. And she couldn't be more different than Chevy, but she just is so great in her own way. And then, she will eventually be paired up with Dan Aykroyd and then Bill Murray as update, co-anchors on the show. And I think she just does such an amazing job with them as well. And we go back to something like Point Counterpoint, where she's going toe to toe with someone like Dan Aykroyd, who to me is the best fast talker in the history of the show. That guy can speak the phone book, right? And he goes at her with stuff that he's saying in a way that is so beautiful to watch, and then she just gets him right back, and it's amazing to watch. I just love Jane, her poise as a cast member, and her ability through all the ups and downs, all the craziness that we ever heard about the original cast, the drugs, the fights, all that stuff. All you ever heard was that Jane was so professional, wanted to go out and do a great job, and beloved. And to me, that is why her legacy is so strong on the show. And for years and years later, I think that not only women, but in general, SNL cast members look back at her as one of the greatest cast members of all time. So totally well-deserved here. Saying love all of that. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I just love that she's remained a friend of the show, to some extent. That hasn't always happened with everyone, but that seems to be the case with her, and I love it.
Absolutely. Saying all that, go ahead, Ian. Yeah, you go ahead.
There's a reason why the cast made her the union rep. She negotiated the contracts for the 7 cast members when they were, when they had to do that. She was on Battle of the
only sober one.
Right. She was on Battle of the Network Stars. Like, she did the NBC stuff that the other cast member, John Belushi, wouldn't have shown up in Battle of the Network Stars. But you had Jane Curtin that could do that. And then she went home and hung out with her husband in Connecticut.
Right. I do also love her on Third Rock from the Sun. I think she's so great there.
And Kate Mallett.
Yeah, she's unreal. She's just so great. And I mean, like I said, made for SNL, absolutely. She has definitely a role to play in the history of the show. From a numbers perspective, 4.52 sketches per episode, same amount that we had earlier in the night with Parnell. So 12th all time among cast members, tied for 12th with 30 or more episodes. I mean, she was on a lot during those original days, and 106 episodes, never shut out, always there. She goes from 7th in sketch appearances in the first season to 4th to 3rd to 3rd to 2nd, and she's very much involved in the show. So I think, in my opinion, definitely too low on the list. I'm curious from both of you if there are any other moments that you want to bring up from Jane's time at the show. Haynes, anything else that we didn't talk about yet?
That we didn't talk about yet. Oh, I don't know. Let me say this. Yeah, as we were sitting here discussing this, and I'm glad you came back to me. I was going to have to interject and say now, while we're processing this, like, 35 just doesn't sit with me. It's definitely too low. I just, like, especially putting it in the context that I put it in earlier. Like, there's no way I would mention 34 other names before we got to Jane Curtin. I just think she's too influential. Shame on you, audience. I won't go that far, but to me, it feels too low. I'm not sure what the number would be, but it feels like it doesn't sit with me. 35.
Yeah, and we'll talk through that. I think tonight was a night of heavy hitters, like I said, and I think they were all a little too low in their own ways. Ian, any final thoughts on Jane Curtin?
Just two sketches I'd recommend. One, when Mother's Day, and she's Tom Snyder's mother, and Aykroyd's Tom Snyder. She's Tom Snyder, and she's just as good as Tom Snyder's mother as Dan Aykroyd is as Tom Snyder. And then a crazy sketch on the Steve Martin Blues Brothers episode that many people feel is the greatest episode of all time. It's a sketch where she and John Belushi are playing a married couple, which is already, a little crazy. And they have this weird foreplay where Belushi confides in her that he's sleeping with their babysitter, and she confides that she's sleeping with their 65-year-old pharmacist. But then you realize at the end it's just foreplay for them to get started, and it's just a well acted and really funny piece.
Yeah, that's a great one. So thanks for bringing those up. Last thing I'll say is that Rolling Stone 10 years ago had her at 47. Said she played a thankless role in the show. Yeah, that is shame on you. That is way too low for Jane. At least we have her at 35. So happy about that. Okay, so we had 4 reveals tonight. The last thing we do here on these ranking shows week by week is we'll show you the rankings, and then I'll show you my updated rankings, because every week I'm swapping the order, and then I'm going to get Haynes and Ian's opinion on this, and where you tell me where I got it wrong. But for me, these are my rankings. So I'll show you. Now we have 1 through 16 available, and I'll explain why I did this here. So here is my updated rankings. I do have the 4 we revealed tonight as the top new 4. I think that of all the cast members we've discussed so far, I do think that all 4 of them deserve to be in the top 4 here. One little swap I did last week, after some thought and discussions with some people, I put Kevin Nealon back up above Taron Killam. I do think that one is a little close, but that's updated from last week. But first, at number 4, I put Chris Parnell. So solid as a cast member, but I do think that the fact that he was let go of the show twice, I think that's probably why I have them on the bottom of the top cast members we have so far. So that's why I have him at number 4, though I absolutely love him. Beck Bennett at number 3. I know some people might quibble with this and say, how can you put Beck Bennett above some of the cast members that have been there before? But I just think he had such a solid career for 8 seasons on the show. In a different era, that guy is crushing the show. And to me, I think over time, his legacy will continue to improve. So I love Beck Bennett. I think he's great. Jane Curtin, I have it too. I think that the next 2 cast members to me are a whole other tier. Jane Curtin, we just talked about her legacy. And I did put John Lovitz above Jane Curtin, because as much as I feel strongly about Jane, I do feel like Lovitz had such a strong importance in the history of the show, as far as, saving a certain season and then becoming a part of this next great cast. I feel like, you can quibble with 1 or 2, but I ended up feeling strong about putting Lovitz above Curtin there. But that is my new 1 through 16. I'll go through them for all the audio listeners. So from 1 down to 16, John Lovitz, Jane Curtin, Beck Bennett, Chris Parnell, Kevin Nealon, Taron Killam, Jimmy Fallon, Joe Piscopo, Sherry O'Terry, Mikey Day, Chevy Chase, Ego Wodem, Tracy Morgan, Bowen Yang, David Spade, and then Martin Short. That is my 1 through 16. Haynes, over to you.
The thing that, I'll comment on the first note that you made first. I do think Kevin Nealon squeaks out Taron Killam. Taron Killam, I think he had a much wider range, but there was something about Kevin Nealon's delivery. He was just so good at landing those lines again and again and again. Taron Killam, much broader, but a little bit more hit or miss. And maybe that's taking risk. Maybe he was taking a little bit more risk, but whatever was coming out of Kevin Nealon was finely tuned enough that I just felt like it was so consistent. And that's what I like about Kevin Nealon. So I like that. The thing that jumps out to me with your list, and maybe it's not, maybe we can't say it right now, but I think when it's all said and done, I think Bowen Yang, I will think of Bowen Yang as a better cast member overall than Joe Piscopo. When it's all said and done, that's the trajectory I see Bowen Yang on. I still think he's got a lot of room to grow, and I think people are going to continue to fall in love with him. He's already an all-star to me. It happened pretty quickly. He's a fast riser, as they say. So when this is all said and done, I do think Bowen Yang will be above Joe Piscopo. But that's not necessarily saying that they will like flip spots because, well, maybe.
Right. And that's the thing, right? We're talking about this on October 2nd, 2023. At the end of Ego and Bowen and Mikey's careers, we may look back and move them up or down the list. And of course, like I said, legacy, the way we look back on things change over time. We only have 4 seasons of data for Bowen yet so far. So, yeah, we'll see. But I agree with you. He has the opportunity to rise up the list tremendously if he has a great season 49 and onward. Ian, would love your thoughts on my rankings 1 through 16 so far.
I wonder what's going to happen every week as it goes on. Are those people going to probably be 1, 2, 3, and 4 and displace people? Obviously, they will. But I just want to know how far Lovitz and Curtin are going to go down, and are they going to do their top 25, maybe 24 and 25, or in the top 30 by the end of it? Because I don't think they should be 35 and 37, but everything else I agree with.
Okay,
I think your ranking is going to be probably a better one than everybody else.
Than the audience.
I'm trying not to say that, but
first of all, John loves to hear that as much as he loves our audience. He loves the compliments.
John loves
jealous.
John loves bits.
But yes, I agree with my rankings. Thank you. But overall, yeah, I do think that over the next couple of weeks, there will be some people who will probably end up below Lovitz and Curtin. But I think we're headed towards some really, really fascinating cast members to talk about. We're getting into it. Like I said, we're going top 34. Once we get into the top 30, just so many heavy hitters. How do you parse through them all? We're gonna have the answers for you. We're gonna have some great analysts on with you as well to talk through it all and to get their thoughts and opinions on everything. And like I said, tonight was so much fun, and in no small part to our 2 guests we had on here. So Haynes, thank you for joining us tonight. I so appreciate it. What have you been up to?
Man, just living life. I'm so excited for the fall and the whatever it brings as far as this great show that we love. I think you guys may be witnessing a moment in history right now. I think I'm losing this thing tomorrow. So this is the longest.
Wait, you said you were shaving the beard when SNL comes back.
Did I say that?
Do you know I think you did.
Did I say that?
I'm pretty sure you did. Do you know something that I don't?
Okay. Yes, SNL is coming back. I listen. I don't recall saying that. Obviously, we can check the tapes. If I did say that, here's what you need to understand. Every moment of my life is spontaneous, and half of it's bullshit. So we'll never. But I feel right now. I have the feeling that I'm going to lose this thing. This is I've never tried to grow a beard this long in my life. I'm 38 years old, and this is by far the longest I've ever grown it. It's getting pretty wily. Been getting a lot of calls from the Taliban. Thank you very much. And so I'm thinking about trimming it up. So this may be a little artifact. Like I may never do this again. I hope that I can look back when I'm 80 and say, I remember that beard I had on the Saturday Night Network in 2023.
Yes, it is all documented for everybody to see.
That's the note I wanted to end the show on.
Yeah, 100%. Next time Haynes comes on the show, you're going to think he's Haskell. That's what.
I have to cut this too. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. Well, thank you for joining us, Haynes. Appreciate it. Ian, please tell the listeners where they can find your podcast and everything that you've been up to. You were fantastic tonight. So great to hear from you.
Oh, thank you. Ian Talks Comedy is available on Spotify. It's available on Apple Podcasts, 10 other places. And I'm going to have now that the strike is over, there are a couple of SNL writers that's not current, but former, who said, I want to hold out until the strike is over. I don't know if I'm allowed to do this. So I'll be getting to them in November sometime. And I wish I could grow a beard. I can't. And I always wanted to look like a Civil War general.
Okay. All right.
Is that a roast joke? Is that an insult? I do kind of look like a Civil War general.
No,
I think you
that's
do in a way.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you do. That's as straight as it gets, Sains. You do look like a Civil War general.
Which side,
Okay.
though? Which side?
Yeah.
The North. The
What?
North.
Thank you.
The North, yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, over here at the podcast, we will let you know as soon as we have some breaking news. So similar to last year, if we get breaking news on new cast members or hosts that are coming out, we're going to try and go live to break down all the information for you. So we'll have wall-to-wall coverage of season 49 when that's available. If there is news that SNL is coming back next week, next Monday night, I believe we will be doing our preseason roundtable to get you set for the show for that week. We'll also try and have our cast draft that week, and then we'll do the countdown next Thursday night. If there is no SNL on the 14th, we'll be back with another 4 cast members, revealing them next Monday night. So that is the schedule. Stay tuned to our social media to see everything we have going on. And also, we are on the SNL press list. So we get information from the show and then we get to release it to all of you. So if you follow us on social platforms, you're going to find out first what is happening with the show. So find us on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, at the SNL Network to see everything that is happening with the new season of Saturday Night Live. You can also subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcast, and Spotify to check out everything we've got going on. Those subscriptions really help people find the show, review as well, like the video, all those things. I really appreciate it. Okay, for everybody in the chat, so excited to get to see you every single week and appreciate your feedback. And for Haynes and Ian, thank you guys for joining us. My name is John Schneider from the Saturday Night Network. We will see you next time, everybody. Have a good one.